moving on to discuss the high cost of compliance. We've assembled an all-star team right here, and to lead us in the moderation, he's the man, dude. You've just been doing everything from MME Legal. Let's hear it for Daniel Heyman. I said, let's hear it for Daniel Heyman. All right.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's always tough on the second day. My name's Daniel Heyman. I'm a cannabis attorney out of Switzerland, dad of 3, ex-commodities trader, and I'm very excited today to talk about the high cost of compliance. I was thinking of renaming this session to the high cost of non-compliance. That probably would have been true if we were talking about regulatory product regulations and non-compliance in other cannabis fields, but we're talking about finance here and access to banking, and the reality is that the cost really is too high, and we're going to have to find a way to reduce it. And today with me are really an illustrious panel. I would like all of you to take less time than I did to introduce myself, which is challenging for especially the lawyers here. One. Ricardo, maybe would you take a few seconds to make a very quick introduction?
So for those that don't know who I am, I'm a lawyer for 17 plus years, in the cannabis space now for 5 years on regulation or solutions to regulation in the space. Have been now coming to ICBC for about 5 or 6 years myself now, and assist a lot of cannabis businesses, from CBD companies to medical cannabis companies, from those that are listed in the Toronto Stock Exchange right through to startups in the UK, but across many borders. So working with Daniel if things happen in Switzerland for my clients and vice versa, or a multitude of different jurisdictions. So try and find solutions for clients if best I can, depending on the legislation available to us.
Thank you. You almost managed.
My name's John Fowler. I'm here from Canada. I started my career as a pot dealer, as many did. And then after a series of poor life choices, I briefly became a lawyer. Thankfully, I've recovered from that. You may get there yourself one day. I enjoyed the early boom of the cannabis industry when we probably had more capital than we knew what to do with, building up one of the larger public companies in Canada. And then since 2020, I've been working at Muskoka Grown. We're a high-quality craft grower in Canada and really focused on the German export market. And looking forward to the discussion today because we've really had the ups and downs, and we're really in a position now where we have a wonderful business, and managing our capital properly and managing our compliance is a huge part of our day-to-day.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Gaspar Frischkotz. I'm a licensed attorney from Slovenia, and I'm with the Tallman Group for three years approximately. What we're doing with Tallman Group is that we're basically a private investor fund when we have investors who are looking to invest into cannabis companies. And in my spare time, I try still to be the attorney, which is less and less. So I'm going to try to be really quick.
Okay, just to add to your background, I think it's important to say that you're very instrumental in co-drafting basically legislation for legalization in Slovenia at the moment. So you're very closely working with the parliament.
Yeah, I was not allowed to say that, but yeah.
But I am. Okay, next.
I'm Erin Butler. I'm the CFO with the Global Cannabis Exchange group of companies. We're an online trading platform for bulk cannabis and hemp and a full-service brokerage. We started in Canada and work with over 700 LPs across the globe and in Canada, and really focusing now on a lot of international import and export. So we, in talking to hundreds of LPs monthly, definitely get to hear a lot of their compliance issues, and our large focus is supporting those clients in any way we can to sort of smooth all the bumps in the road as much as we can.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Siegfried Leger. As it sounds, I'm French. I'm the co-founder and CFO of Can Exchange. So we are a market infrastructure specialized in exchanging cannabis as a commodity globally. And we provide all sorts of services from KYC due diligence, financing, and other sorts of logistic assistance. And today, I hope my, let's say, background in investment banking and as a trader and as an algorithmic trader manager will help to understand a bit better the scope of what we are facing right now.
Thank you very much. I would actually like to start with you, Ricardo, quickly.
Again.
Yeah, again. One of the first question, what's the actual problem here? Why is access to banking so difficult? And what's your experience?
Right, okay. As quickly as I can, because actually that could take a whole day. But the main issue is we've got to look backwards to try and understand what the issues are to move forwards. Many jurisdictions, including the UK now, have legalized cannabis for one use or another, or multiple uses. So in the UK, November 2018, we changed legislation to allow cannabis to be medically prescribed, which is a great thing. Unfortunately, there's other laws and legislations that need to also be triggered or changed or modified to allow that activity to happen. And it becomes an afterthought for lawmakers. It's not their fault because they're actually trying to do something good and progress things, but as a result, that causes problems. So one of the issues for the banking or finance institutions is AML KYC, which triggers from, if I talk from a UK perspective, Proceeds of Crime Act. The Proceeds of Crime Act, again, is a good legislation. It stops criminal activity, stops people money laundering, allows law enforcement to seize those assets if someone has done something illegal. Unfortunately, for the banking institutions, what does that mean? Under their policies or checklists when they open accounts for clients, as soon as they hear the word cannabis, it becomes a dirty word for them. Oh, isn't that criminal activity? Because we haven't dealt with it. That's, in essence, the main issue. In practice, what ends up happening is that cannabis is actually not used as a term. So if you think, and I'm talking from a UK's perspective for clients that I've seen this happen, you have a client that is operating as a wholesaler dealer, for argument's sake, or even a growth facility. They will be saying that they are a pharma company, which they are under their license, but dealing with unlicensed medicines. They don't list what unlicensed medicines they are dealing with, nor should they have to. They won't list that I'm dealing with opioids or whatever the case may be. They start operating, Barclays opens them the account, or other banks available, opens them the account, and they start operating. They see loads of money coming into the account, and they do an audit. The audit says, well, why have you received funds, or why have you made a payment to Canada? Let's say they're bringing in goods from Canada. Well, I'm paying for raw material being biomass or lump sum of, or flour, cannabis flour. Oh, you never told us you were dealing with cannabis. No, I told you I was a pharma company dealing with unlicensed medicines. Really sorry, but our policy doesn't allow us.
Ricardo, I have a question here.
Yeah,
just to jump in. Okay, so you're saying that might happen at the stage of an audit. Is that not something that's already sort of standard in the UK in the context of a KYC procedure? In Switzerland, that's what it would happen. They would ask you to send a business plan, and in the business plan, obviously, it would be obvious that cannabis is part of the business.
You would have thought so, not in all cases. Does that come up?
Yeah.
And the KYC is about the individuals generally. I'm a business owner who, where's my passport? Who am I? Give my history. The business is a startup. I'm licensed to do something.
Very different in Switzerland.
It's slightly different, but they all tinge from the same thing. The issue is that these audits happen, or let's say a bank is a bit more forthcoming with the questions and they find out they don't even allow you to open a bank account. So you go to challenger banks or Revolut, which should never be the case for any corporate business in any event.
Great bank, though.
It does until they start their own audit, because some of these challenger banks don't have proper banking licenses. They operate or back off another banking license. And depending if there's cross-border transactions, that might cause an audit, because their banking partner might be Barclays, it might be someone else. And that creates an audit. So sometimes the audit is not just a generic audit, it's based on a transaction. So those are the issues. Mainly, the obvious is that causes issues for the operation of the business. It's not just, I can't buy my raw material from Canada or sell it and create an invoice and receive my payment. But what about payment of my employees, insurance, my next rent for my facility? It
Okay, so
stops
here we're
everything.
talking about basic banking service, the most basic operational banking service is already a big challenge in the industry. So that's one element. There's another element when it comes to financing. Maybe John, from your experience, you can give us 2-3 insights about what the challenges are and in which fields of your operations where you need financing, you're hitting hurdles that are difficult to pass.
Yeah, absolutely. So you would think in Canada, we should have no problem banking. We're a fully federally legal country. We've had, legal medical cannabis now almost 10 years, and we're over 5 years with recreational cannabis. Unfortunately for us, and this is mainly to do with the illegality in the United States federally, so we have 5 major banks, and then you would have local community banks, challenger banks, as you called them. Basically what happens for us is everything adds additional cost and complexity. So for our day-to-day banking, a company like ours is with a community bank, you pay some higher fees, and you have low services. So example, sending basic wire transactions, we're still sending paper documents to our bank, like it's the 1990s. If you do want to go to a regular bank, they're happy to have you, but they charge you a cannabis tax. So if you want to go to a major Canadian bank, they'll charge you up to $40,000 for the privilege of making sure you're not a criminal. So right off the bat, you're behind on cost. And this is when you have a full, federal license, everything, all these things that you can prove. When you get into operating the business, the challenge is it's 100% an equity finance business. So if you want to build a facility, you need to find investors that are willing to put in equity. You might get something that looks like debt but is equity, like a convertible note. But there's no regular financial institution that's going to give you a loan for your capital. And even if you're a profitable business, they're not going to give you a loan for the working capital. This even goes so far in our industry. Again, Canada, 100% legal. A Canadian cannabis company really struggles to get a simple Visa card to buy products on Amazon. You have to run around to employees and say, hey, will you put this on Amazon and we can send you an expense report in 2 weeks. The end result of this is all of this adds little pieces of cost and complexity and starts to drive up the working capital challenges of the business. So, look, many Canadian businesses are losing money because their business model doesn't work and they're unprofitable. But even those who are profitable, it's really challenging to convert that to cash and convert that to growth because every step along the line is either not available to you or is significantly more expensive than if you're in any other industry.
Yeah. So there's basically almost no possibility to leverage your finances.
It's what's interesting. So with changes of interest rates over the last few years, and now changes with tariffs in Canada, cannabis has passed both by. Interest rates go up, we don't care because nobody has any debt in the cannabis industry. Tariffs go on, we don't care because we can't do anything with the United States. So it's very odd being a Canadian entrepreneur and not caring about the 2 biggest macro storylines. But the reality is we deal with the fallout of that, every day in our businesses.
Yeah. Sig, you come from investment banking. And you talk to the big banks. What's your experience of?
So I think big banks, like every bank, they're always interested to understand if there's an opportunity somewhere. I rarely see a banker not interested making some returns. That's for sure. I would say that there's 2 factors. The factor number 1 is there's no education in terms of, obviously nobody knows about this industry. Even the consumer, they don't even know that it's legal or you can legally get a prescription. So imagine what it is for someone working at a high level in banking. They don't even know it's legal. So that's one part. The second part is the fact that obviously there was a lot of examples of company that has been badly managed and that it still has the stigma of a very bad management from these executives. And at the end of the day, banks are a bit reluctant to be obviously involved into this sector. And I would say the last thing as well, for the moment, and you might be surprised about it, maybe, I don't know, in the audience, but for most of the bankers, the returns are still or the market is still too small for them to really start to have an interest into it and to start to say, okay, let's actually at a senior level put pressure on the compliance department, put pressure on the risk department, and let's risk my career as a senior executive to actually do something about it. But with the conversation we had with my colleague that is in the audience as well, and we had quite big conversation at, let's say, executive levels with different banks over Europe. They start to understand it, and they start to be interested about because they understand still the return that can be done, because the returns are quite high because of high cost of compliance. But they still want to see, a 1, 2, 3, 5 billion market opportunity rather than a, 10, 50 million. This is what they're looking at.
We're talking about high costs. Can you guys give me some ideas? What are we talking about for? Yeah.
So, for example, nowadays, if you probably want short-term capital, you probably have credit card levels, which is 20% and above, for sure.
Okay. What's short-term?
So for us, our terms, when you do financing, we provide the financing on a 2.5-month basis, 2.5% per month. And, usually people go for 1 to 3 months. But obviously, these rates apply because these are counterparts that you can insure. Clients you cannot insure, we never tried, but I guess someone that's a capital provider will probably require something that's insane because the risk is way too high.
Okay, so these you can get credit insurance for?
You can in certain circumstances.
Default insurance?
If you know the right people, you may. Extremely difficult. Extremely.
It's very difficult in this market. Yeah. Do you have the same experience in Canada?
Yeah, to sort of echo what John said, we hear the same feedback from a lot of LPs. I'd say the also biggest piece is changing requirements of compliance that we see with our banks. I think initially under legalization, banks thought how they would accept new cannabis clients would look one way, and that has changed over time. So new LPs right now in Canada actually struggle more to get access to bank accounts than they did 5 years ago, which I think is kind of, you'd assume the opposite would be happening. Just even open up a bank account, no line of credit, just to get access to a bank account. And a lot of that really does come down to the exposure into the US market. And when you look at it from the bank's perspective, all they see when they see the cannabis industry is red flags and issues that could potentially open up all of their US exposure into getting shut down. We work quite closely in Alberta with ATB, which is a provincial bank, and that's really been their big feedback on a lot of the challenges that we see, is that from their perspective, they're not willing to take on that risk for the industry. So a big thing that we recommend with a lot of our clients is talking to your bank as much as possible to help to understand when those changes are going to be coming, what is required for cross-border payments. Is it possible, under this current framework of that bank, do you need to find a different, bank within Canada that could help to support that? But that all, again, adds in this constant need for conversation and unknowingness of, will I actually be able to receive funds, send funds as needed, which adds a huge cost to time of executive teams and things like that.
Gasper, sorry, John.
I was going to say, if I can add to that, because at least one party at each transaction is not generally using a top-tier bank, just basic international transaction fees, Forex fees, you could be looking at 2 to 3%. Just to convert money and send, cash overseas, you're looking at, 2.5% per month. If you're factoring any receivables, even in Canada where we get paid by the government, it's still that cost. And then in addition to that, if you're insuring, you might be another 1.5%. So you could be looking at just transactional expenses between 5 and 7% for the privilege of doing business in cannabis, which, again, there's very few industries in the world that would survive under those kind of rates.
Yeah, Gasper, I understand in Slovenia things are a bit easier.
Well, yeah, and it might be because cannabis is or has not been as popular or as widely known. So even with the banks, because there were basically no cannabis companies in Slovenia or were until recently. So it was not really an issue. When we were, for example, we were opening a bank account for ICBC in Slovenia, the issues that we had were different issues than what I'm hearing from my colleagues. It was basically it was more logistically trying to get the right documents from US and from a specific state.
Just a question. In Slovenia, is there already any framework to get medical cannabis in place now?
Yes, we actually do. We have it since 2014.
Yes.
But it's been more or less only on paper. I mean, we've been using it for terminally ill cancer patients, for pediatric patients. But it's, I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, it was per year there was around 1 kilo or something of THC prescribed. So it was
Very low volumes. It's like Switzerland,
Yeah.
basically pre-legalization of the medical program. Yeah.
So the issues that we had were different. So cannabis companies, from my experience, that were trying to open a bank account in Slovenia, the issues that they had were more with money laundering, and especially doing transactions outside of EU. Like we heard, if you have a small bank in the US, a state bank, you cannot transfer directly to their bank account because they don't have an international bank account. So that was a huge issue for us. And also doing transfers within the EU because this might be funny, but we actually have an EU country being blacklisted for money laundering, and that's Croatia. It's the only EU country that is, so making transfers to Croatia can be quite challenging, and that's irregardless if you're a cannabis company or not.
Okay, interesting. There's when reason leaves the room sometimes. It's just, okay. We're talking about the problems now. Maybe we can start and switch and talk about some solutions. So, Erin, maybe you can talk a little bit about your business and what type of solutions you offer your clients for short-term debt. We discussed a little bit. What about long-term as well? Maybe you can talk about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, long-term debt in the cannabis industry, I think, remains to be a huge challenge. I don't have any quick solutions on that. We do have an invoice factoring fund, similar to John's comment. It's a couple % a month, a daily rate. We will do that on insured-backed receivables. So we like to help our clients get EDC-backed. Export Development Canada helps to insure receivables that we can
EDC?
then. Export Development Canada, so it's a government agency in Canada that helps to underwrite receivables.
So it's basically governmental support for the export business.
Correct, yeah, so they do it for all industries. They also help support cannabis, but again, what we are sort of running into is now some of those companies have sort of maxed their limits on their underwriting capability, so we're struggling to get new clients onto that program, but definitely still very, is a great program if you can get access to it, and then we're able to provide financing, trade financing on that.
And the underwriting is per customer, or is it
It's per buyer.
It's per buyer.
Yeah, but then under that, then you can also get domestic lines of insurance as well, which is great for domestic companies. So then you can also use that to help on your domestic transactions as well, to sort of backleg into better terms across the country, as if you're buying product as well.
You run that on a platform, or?
Yeah, so, we run, it can be against trades done on our platform or trades done off of it, but what we also recommend is if you can use a compliance-based service like ourselves or Can Exchange, where we have rigorous KYC processes. All of our deals have deal confirms and documents that can all be shared with the bank and really help to, register any cannabis-related transactions that are cross-border, and also to register any of your counterparties. So it can definitely help in that anti-money laundering process, and that's definitely something that we do it's just part of what we do.
Just to understand, from the time someone arrives and with the request of short-term financing until with registering the counterparty, with getting underwriting and all of that, what's the timeline, more or less, to get financing?
Yeah, I mean, we can work quite quickly if the buyer has EDC underwritten policies. If not, then we require that insurable, and that's sort of the longest portion. So that can take a few months, but if the EDC is already underwriting that client, then it can be quite quick, as much as a few weeks.
Yeah. John, what's your experience with these short-term financing solutions?
I mean, I'd rather go get the money in a back alley, and I think trust repayment terms there better. I mean, look, the reality is the real solution, especially in Canada, where we don't have the issues like the UK of partially legal, partially illegal. If we were treated like a regular business, if you have a good business plan, a good P&L, you should get support. That is the long-term solution. But we've been holding our breath for that for a very long time. In the short term, I think for financial entrepreneurs, finding a balance between the cost of credit products today and what the cost of a credit product should be, there's a massive entrepreneurial opportunity if you can manage that risk successfully. Right now, the risk is managed through just very high fees for the lender, if it's available at all. In the meantime, for anyone who's in the cannabis business, whether you're buying, whether you're exporting, I think more Canadians here than Germans this weekend. But the real thing is you just have to manage your cash flow. You can put your P&L aside, you can forget about it, and you just have to look at what your cash flow is. And if you're providing credit as a vendor, or if you're asking for credit as a buyer, you have to do a cost of capital calculation. You really have to think about, what's the cost of goods and what's the cost of the financing in the transaction. And when you peel the onion on many of those transactions, there's a very high cost of the capital to facilitate them. And, we're seeing this in Canada. The German market's been a great savior for many Canadian companies, in theory, right? There's many companies that they get a deal, they find a buyer, they come out here, and they start looking at their cash flow and moving from 15 to 30-day payment terms domestically to longer term, adding accounts receivable risk, which we haven't talked about as well. And for many, I think it actually will be potentially a death blow for those vendors, because if one order goes wrong, or if you get hooked on short-term financing, you may feel like your business is growing and your bank account is shrinking.
If I may add on that.
You may counter, of course, and convince John
No,
why
no, I
using
think-
your services.
I think it's going to be just
go for it.
complementary, because I understand the pain here of the costs and everything. And at the same time, the cost of capital for funds that run financing are expensive too. But we do more than hundreds of analysis a year in terms of credit analysis. So we have the software where we can analyze all the risk profile and credit profile of a lot of cannabis companies. And we have to say, the first solution comes from the cannabis company themselves, because how many times we see the financials not being in order, how many times we see late payment to third-party providers such as utilities, that shows up in the credit report as well. So, I think, and it's true for everything in life, the solution starts from each of us at the end of the day. And, we are always, and then we try to educate companies by companies. Actually, we help them even to shape their financials to make sure they tick the box to have better credit record in the credit score software that are super expensive, by the way, as well. That's why the high cost of compliance exists as well. A software like that can cost anywhere between 20 to 50,000 euros a year just to run this kind of software. So, yeah, I think if the company help themselves, at the end of the day, it's going to help the whole industry, and the rates will go down. And the business will expand at the end of the day. And the last thing we have to take into consideration, why the rates are so high as well, because you have to factor, even if you are insured, it's like you have your car that's insured. It's not because you have your car that's insured that you want to claim your insurance or you want to crash it, right? So you want to have enough margins to cover for a loss at the end of the day. And the risk of losses are quite high, so you have to take that into consideration.
Sorry if I may just add, it kind of seems a bit weird, because from what I've heard is the cannabis companies are, they're good businesses in a way that they have no debt, basically, because they can get it from banks. And the issues that you mentioned, like late payments and things, these are things that happen with every business. And I think it should be taken into consideration that the cannabis industry is growing. There are more serious businesses being developed. And the issues are always going to be there. You can have a tech company that's late on payments or doesn't have their finance in order because they're tech geeks and they don't care about these things. So,
but then at the end of the day, it's not necessarily us choosing the model. It's the way the insurance companies work, and this is what they analyze, and they use this software and they analyze this payment behavior. So I would say, and that's the thing, when you are in a sector with a lot of stigma already, you have to be even the best possible student compared to the others. Unfortunately, this is like that, but...
Yeah, and it's very different depending on jurisdictions. There's jurisdictions that are mature, where you might get, a healthy balance sheet because people understand what the balance sheet is. And there's some markets that are just in Europe, where it's a mess. I get pitch decks all the time, and I see this stuff. I'm like, who wrote that? And it's not to judge them. It's just the reality. It's very immature. It's a very immature market. So the standards are, there's a really wide gap. Ricardo, you had a comment, and then Erin, sorry. I know you wanted
so obviously as a lawyer, I don't offer any short-term solutions, but I just want to add, the short-term solutions that have been discussed here is quite depressing, because actually who ends up paying for the cost are companies like this gentleman, or companies that are in the audience. And I understand what you're saying about the cost of insurance. You make a very valid point there, that this is always a cost of defaulting payments. These are short-term solutions that shouldn't exist in this legal licensed areas. I think the long-term solution that will address the high rates at that end is to create competitivity. The only way you're going to create competitivity is address and tackle the bull by its horns. And that is going back to the lawmakers and saying, look, you changed the law. I'm not asking you to do any more than what you've already done, but we need to just add a line here or change policy to educate the banks, because it is an educational piece. I get it. There are many people in London streets that don't still know that cannabis is illegal. So I get it from an institutional, large corporate, multinational bank that those issues will also be within that sort of computer says no and I haven't got time to discuss it, right? That's basically it. But the only way you change that is by going back to the policymakers, the lawmakers, and say, can you just add a line and publicize this and force the banks to do it? Because I guess what's going to happen is they'll be knocking on your door offering you a cheaper rate because their counterparties will be lower. So it is a long-term solution, but we'll deal with a short-term problem, because they'll be worried and they'll start dropping their rates very quickly.
So a few years ago in Switzerland, there was the Credit Suisse. You remember that big bank that made the unicorn exit recently to UBS? Well, that company was advertising all over the city with cannabis plans. Big, come to us, we're modern, we're going to finance your business. I had not one client, I have many of them in Switzerland, who got any type of finance by Credit Suisse. My advice would be, and now I'm negotiating with a small bank in Switzerland, because small banks have more pressure. They need to find business. They need to be more innovative. And I think innovation, I understand fully what you say on policy. That's one thing. But policy, the wheels of policy are very, very slow. So yes, we'll work on that. But the other wheels that are running fast is innovation. And I'm working with a small bank now in Switzerland. I believe potentially we'll be able to pull off CapEx financing for a Swiss facility. Let's see, okay, I'll tell you about it next year. But for now, that's something that is counterintuitive, but talking to very small provincial banks sometimes could be interesting, because their appetite for risk might be higher because they have to show some better results. Erin, you had something to say before.
Well, just that, I don't believe that the short-term financing cost is going to make sense for every company and for every deal. I think looking at your cash flow from sort of a diversified perspective, terms on our domestic platform are 30 down, 50 down, 50 net 30. So even when selling into the different provincial wholesalers, we're like, if you can get some B2B wholesale to help support that cash flow, because retail payments can take longer, there can be buybacks, there can be more issues on that. And I'd say similarly on the international side as well, that these deals take a lot of time, require a lot of cash flow in support of that. And so just taking into understanding that if there's a high margin opportunity, then maybe using some short-term capital makes sense in that issue, but it's not always a fit. If the margin isn't there, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Maybe Sig, you can tell us a bit about innovation. How do you guys innovate to make to reduce the cost for your customers?
So yeah, obviously, a lot of part of it is to make things as digital as possible. So it's invest in technology. Technology investment costs a lot. We have a tech team of 4 people, and these individuals, because they are obviously bright, smart, and intelligent, they cost a lot of money. So yes, if we can process more automatically things, the cost is going down, obviously. The second part is, it's not too much about innovation. It's more like what you mentioned, and this is our job. We go across Europe or different jurisdictions, and we need negotiate with different capital providers. And the more we can show track record as well, the more transaction getting repaid, the more as well we can push down the rates at the end of the day. Because on our side, we can justify that we de-risk as much as possible the transactions. Because what makes a lot of sense as well is not only you finance the transaction, it's because you understand the transaction as well. In the background, you understand what kind of product people are exchanging. You understand as well if these products are highly likely to be sold or not. And for example, what we will avoid to do is some territories like UK, they work on an inventory basis, so people need financing to build this inventory. But we've seen, and like you mentioned, so many business plans. Yes, I have this inventory, I've reinvented the wheel, and I have the best strain and the best product. But at the end of the day, they haven't even negotiated any distribution agreement, or they don't have a contract that can support that at the end of the day. So they want to build an inventory, and they're not sure what they're going to do with it. So I think in terms of innovation, it's before to start to innovate is come back to business 101 and actually try to apply what exists in different industry, but taking into consideration that we are evolving in a very difficult environment, which is cannabis.
Can you give us, for the audience, maybe a practical, tangible example of a client that you ran through?
Yeah,
how it worked,
so,
or what didn't work? And where you learn. Maybe one that didn't work would be interesting.
What didn't work, and because obviously we cover all aspects of KYC due diligence and compliance, and when we have customers that want to work directly with a new, for example, buyer, they approach us and they say, look, I have this client, they want to purchase from us these products. What do you think about the companies?
Which products are we talking? Give me one example.
Okay,
give me one example.
Here it was more on the CBD side. It was more a chain of supermarkets willing to buy a substantial amount of CBD drops. It was for 1.7 million euros or something like this. And when you were doing the first level of KYC and due diligence process, everything was lining up to the point that they actually provided the documentation and the passports of the executive of the company, because obviously we do individual checks as well, because we have to run financial crimes and anti-money laundering. And, discussing with the executive of the company and everything would line up. And the last thing we asked, though, because, it was 1.7 million financing, it was quite big, we were asking them to actually identify themselves through AI. So we have the AI tools where people have facial recognition through their passport on the NFC. And they actually refused to do it, and all of a sudden, all the email addresses that was the email corresponding to the companies and everything disappeared, and they just left, and they disappeared overnight. And then I sent someone actually physically to the company to double check, and they never heard about this kind of contract. They don't even distribute these products in this supermarket chain. So our client, obviously, for him, it was a big order. He was pressuring a lot because he was excited to fulfill this order. But at the end of the day, because he told us, if you cannot finance it, guys, I'm going to go by myself to do it because I need this money. And
well, thank you for giving us a bit of a flavor into the dirty side of cannabis finance.
You can write a book about it. For sure.
Okay, we have 2 minutes left. I would like to give the audience an opportunity to ask one or two questions.
One question.
One or two.
One quick question. Let's hear it from the panel, first of all. Does anyone have a question? Oh, always way in the back. Oh no! So 2 questions. Okay, you have to flip a coin. All right, we'll yeah. Well, I will, Bo. Thanks. Here we go.
Thank you. I wanted to ask if you've looked at Asia at all. I'm from Sri Lanka, and we've just legalized medical cannabis for export purposes. So have any of you looked at Asia in terms of the banking? Because for us, long-term debt, all of our banks are actually willing to lend to us, which is interesting. So if anybody wants to come to Asia, Sri Lanka's open for business.
There you go. That's just reduced their percentage cost.
No, never. We do some imports from China, for example. We never looked at Sri Lanka or any other country in Asia, but that would be a pleasure to learn a bit more about it. Okay.
I'm sure you can have a great discussion in the hallway. Let's hear it again for this panel. This is fantastic. We thank you all so very much for your time and expertise and knowledge. This is the International Cannabis Business Conference 2025 right here in Berlin.